بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Before Ramadan, we spoke about the Deir Yasin massacre that took place in the year 1948. The Deir Yasin massacre was a tragic event that took place on April 9th, 1948, when the Haganah forces, these are the Jewish military forces, they were led by Menachem Begin. And Menachem Begin later on became the prime minister of Israel. So before the establishment of Israel on April 9th, 1948, this was about 1 month before the official establishment of Israel, Menachem Begin and his forces, his Haganah forces, they attacked the village of Deir Yasin. And after fierce fighting, they occupied the village of Deir Yasin, and they massacred the people of the village. They killed the men, they killed the women, they killed the children. The massacre of Deir Yasin, it resembles the current massacre that is going on of our brothers and our sisters in Gaza. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them relief. The massacre of Deir Yasin in 1948, it's very similar to what is going on today. So Menachem Begin, who was the leader of the Deir Yasin massacre, and later on he became the prime minister of the Zionist entity known as Israel, he used to boast about the Deir Yasin massacre. Later on, he would brag about it. He said this operation, the Deir Yasin operation, it caused the Arabs to panic. After the news of Deir Yasin and what happened to the people of Deir Yasin, after this news spread to the Arabs, they began to flee and they became terrified before us whenever they heard of our arrival. So he used to boast about it and he used to brag about that brutal massacre. Wal-iyadhu billah. This is the type of people we're talking about. The next day after the Deir Yasin massacre, on April 10th, 1948, the World Zionist Council announced a decision to establish an independent Jewish state in the Palestinian land. And they set the date for the establishment of the Jewish state to be May 16th, 1948. And the reason why they selected this date was because the British mandate of Palestine was officially going to end on May 15th. The British, they had announced that they were going to leave Palestine, and they were not going to keep any control of Palestine anymore. They said that they were going to leave on May 15th. So the World Zionist Council, they said, okay, the next day after the British leave, we are going to announce the establishment of the Jewish state. So they made their plan to announce the establishment of Israel on May 16th. 1948, the day after the British mandate was set to end. Right, so they made this announcement in April that they're going to declare their state on May 16th. Now, the battles that began at the beginning of 1948, these battles between the Haganah and between the Palestinians, they continued for a number of months. And the Jews were constantly being supplied with weapons from Europe and especially from America. The United States was sending weaponry to the Haganah, to the Jews, in order for them to kill and expel the Palestinians from their land. So this was going on in the beginning of 1948, and it persisted for a period of time. On April 18th, 1948, this is less than a month before the British are set to leave Palestine. On April 18th, The British, while they were still there, in the last few days of the British mandate, the British continued to evacuate Palestinian villages. The British, they continued to expel Palestinians from their villages and allowed Jews to come and occupy and settle in those Palestinian villages. So the British, they were cooperating with the Haganah to expel the Palestinians and bring in Jewish occupiers. On April 22nd of 1948, the Haganah, they actually managed to occupy the city of Haifa, a very important city. They expelled the Palestinians from Haifa and they occupied Haifa. Then about a week later, on April 30th, 1948, the Haganah, they managed to occupy West Jerusalem. The Jerusalem is divided into two parts. There's West Jerusalem and there's East Jerusalem. Of course, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is in East Jerusalem, right? So on April 30th, the Haganah, these Jews, they were able to occupy West Jerusalem. They were able to occupy West Jerusalem and they expelled the Arabs and the Muslims from West Jerusalem, right? So it became very clear that preparations were being made for the Jews to actually declare the establishment of their state. So after the occupation of West Jerusalem by the Jews, demonstrations began in the Arab world. And there was a big uproar in the Islamic world, right? So Lebanon and Syria, they issued a decision to send their forces to Palestine after the British mandate ends. They made this declaration on May 1st. So this is about 2 weeks before the end of the British mandate on May 15th. So on May 1st, Lebanon and Syria, under pressure from the people of Lebanon and Syria, they didn't really want to do it. The governments didn't want to do it. But the people, the good people of Lebanon, the good people of Syria, they pressured their governments to do something about what's going on in Palestine. So under that pressure, Lebanon and Syria, they announced that we will send forces, we will send soldiers to Palestine to try to reclaim that land for the Palestinians. But we will only send the forces after the end of the British mandate, not before. So they made this announcement on May 1st. The British mandate is going to end when? On May 15th. So the Lebanon and Syria are saying, we're going to send soldiers, but not yet. We're going to wait until May 15th. When the British leave, then we're going to send our soldiers to help liberate Palestine from these Jews. But not before that, not before the British mandate ends. Iraq also announced that it would send forces through Jordan to enter Palestine, but again they said only after May 15th, only after the British mandate ends, right? So in the meantime, during this short period of time, from the beginning of May to May 15th, about 2 weeks, the Arabs, they are making their promises that we're going to send our soldiers, but not yet. We're going to send our soldiers after 2 weeks. But during these 2 weeks, the Jews were continuing to accumulate weaponry. And they were continuing to prepare themselves. In the meantime, France was sending planes loaded with weapons to the Haganah. And the Haganah continued during this period to expel Palestinians from the sites that they had occupied. And it became easier and easier for them to occupy more villages and more cities because now they have weapons coming in from Europe and they have weapons coming in from America as well. So during this period of time, the Jews, they were able to expel 200,000 Palestinians from different cities and different villages and different regions, right? So this was a very bad situation. And the Mujahideen within Palestine, right? The Arabs, the Palestinians who were Mujahideen, who had their own jihad organizations within Palestine, they continued to try to defend their lands, but they did not have any official support from any of the Arab armies, right? So there's only so much that they could do. They tried, but they were not able to withstand the strength of the Haganah, which was getting this support from Europe and getting this support from America, getting these weapons and everything, right? The internal Mujahideen within Palestine, they were not able to keep up with this because they did not have support from any of the official Arab armies from the outside. On May 12th, this is just a few days before the official end of the British mandate, Egypt also announced that it would send its forces into Palestine. But again, they said after May 15th, not before May 15th. So they announced this on May 12th, that we will send our forces, but after a few days, after the British mandate ends. As for the Jordanian army, they actually took the initiative before May 15th. The Jordanian army, they took the initiative before May 15th to attack one of the camps. But it was really not much compared to the massive military operations carried out by the Haganah. The Haganah getting all of this support from Europe and getting all of this support from America, right? It was difficult to face them. So the Jordanian army, they tried, they came in before May 15th, but it was not enough. It was not enough to withstand the forces of the Haganah. So these Jews, the Haganah, they were able to occupy many cities within Palestine. And this is before the official establishment of the Jewish state, right? They occupied the city of Baysan, and this paved the way for them to occupy the rest of the cities in Palestine, especially Jerusalem. So the Palestinian people within Palestine, they revolted. There was a big uprising in Jaffa. And the locals, everyone who could carry weapons, people who had knives and daggers, right, whatever weapons they had, they tried to confront the Jews, even though they did not have support from the outside armies of the Arab nations. So these battles continued one after another, and the Jewish encroachment on Palestinian villages and Palestinian cities, it persisted one after another. The Jews, they kept taking city after city after city, and this continued until May 14th, right? And the British, they had announced that they're officially going to end their mandate and leave Palestine when? On May 15th. But the British High Commissioner, he actually left Jerusalem and returned to Britain one day early. He left on May 14th instead of May 15th. So the mandate was officially supposed to end on May 15th, and he was supposed to leave on May 15th, but he left a day early. He left on May 14th. He left on May 14th. So the Jews, they did not wait. They did not wait. As soon as the High Commissioner left on May 14th, that same afternoon, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Ben Gurion announced the establishment. He officially announced the establishment of the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948. And 11 minutes after Ben Gurion's announcement, just 11 minutes after his announcement, the President of the United States of America at that time, Harry Truman, he declared America's recognition of the establishment of the State of Israel. Just 11 minutes after the official declaration of the State of Israel, the US President announced that the United States recognizes the State of Israel. So, this is how the state, the Zionist state, the State of Israel, was established. So, the British mandate ended. And then, of course, the Arab countries that had agreed to intervene after the British mandate ended, the Syrian army, the Lebanese army, the Iraqi army, right, the Jordanian forces, they moved into central Palestine. They said that they would come into Palestine after the British mandate ended, and they came into Palestine after the British mandate ended. Also, the Egyptian army, they moved towards Asqalan. And the Jordanian army, they moved towards Ramallah and Jerusalem. Now, the thing is that most of these Arab countries were originally under British control as well, right? The Brits, the British Empire, they had colonized these Arab countries before, right? So many of these Arab countries that were originally under British control, they still had British military officers in their army. And the one who was appointed in charge of this Arab army, of these different countries coming together, they all decided to collaborate together and appoint one basically chief of staff for this army, or for these different armies, one chief of staff. The guy who was appointed was not an Arab, he was a British officer himself. He was a British officer himself, right? And many of these forces in these armies, these different Arab armies, they were in direct coordination with the British, right? They were cooperating with the British to arrange the future of Palestine. So you can see internally there was a lot of betrayal going on. Now, one of these Arab armies, it was led by 50 officers in the high command. And out of these 50 officers, 45 of them were British. Can you imagine that? It's supposed to be an Arab army, and all of the commanders, there are 50 main commanders. Out of those 50 main commanders, 45 of them are British. And this is supposed to be an Arab army. This was the situation, right? So before the battle began and before these Arab armies entered the fight, the Arab forces inside Palestine, they issued many key decisions. These Arab armies, they come into Palestine and they make decisions. These Arab armies, they say to the Palestinians, okay, we're going to help you, but you need to do things our way. So one of the things that these Arab armies tried to do, they said that the local or internal jihad organizations that you have within Palestine, they have to all assimilate under us. You cannot be independent anymore. You have to work under our command. So these official armies are saying that all of the jihad organizations within Palestine have to now work under the command of these official armies. And they actually dissolved a number of these internal jihad organizations. And they said we have to disarm all of the local Palestinians. There were local Palestinians, who had knives, who had daggers, right, that wanted to participate in the jihad. These official armies now are saying, no, the locals can't be involved and they have to be disarmed. Their weapons have to be confiscated. The Arab armies are telling them this. And they're saying that everything has to go through us, everything has to officially be under us. So they were disarming their own people. The Arab armies were disarming the Palestinians themselves. Right? This really paved the way for a huge defeat for the Palestinians in 1948. Now, in addition to this, in addition to all of these issues, the total number of soldiers of all of these Arab armies combined, Syrian army, the Egyptian army, the Jordanian army, the Lebanese army, the Iraqi army, if you combine all of them, the number of soldiers that came to fight against the Jews, to re-liberate Palestine from them, the total number of these soldiers was only 24,000 soldiers. It's not a big number. It was only 24,000 soldiers, and they were very weak in coordinating amongst themselves. They lacked military experience, right? They were not organized at all. But as for the Jewish army, this Haganah, they had reached 70,000 soldiers. 70,000 soldiers, and they were fully armed with weapons supplied by the United States and Europe. And they were also highly trained. They were trained by the British. They were trained by the British military, and they were ready for battle, right? So if you compare the two sides, really the Jewish side was much better equipped and they were much better prepared. Now, even with all of this, in terms of the lands that the Palestinians still had up to this point, even though they were expelled from so many cities, right? The Palestinians still had control of about 82% of the land of Palestine. And before that, of course, it was closer to 100%. The Arabs, they had that land, right? But slowly it was being chipped away. But still, even up to this point, the Palestinians, they still held 82% of the land of Palestine, right? So when these Arab forces entered to liberate Palestine, the Egyptian forces entered first. And of course, they were the first ones who entered after the mandate. But before the mandate, there were some Jordanian soldiers who had entered first. right? But after the mandate ended, the Egyptian forces were the first to enter, and they crossed the border and they began to attack the Haganah. 3 units from the Jordanian military, they also crossed the Jordan River and they attacked the Jewish soldiers as well. The Lebanese forces, they crossed into Palestine and they actually managed to liberate a few of the Palestinian villages that are on the border with Lebanon. Now, there were some volunteer forces also who decided to organize themselves and participate in this attempt to liberate Palestine. And most of these volunteers came from Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, it was established in Egypt by Hassan al-Banna, but it had many branches in other Arab countries as well. There was a branch in Syria, there was a branch in Iraq, right? There were branches of the Muslim Brotherhood in all of these Arab countries. There was a branch in Jordan, and each branch had its own leader. So the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, they actually mobilized and they sent a number of soldiers into Palestine as well to attempt to liberate it from the Jews. The leader of the Ikhwan in Syria was a man named Mustafa As-Sibai, rahmatullahi alayh. He was a scholar and he was a respected figure, and he was the leader of Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun in Syria. So he was able to gather a number of volunteers, and he, with those volunteers, entered into Palestine. Also, forces from Iraq tried to enter Palestine as well under Sheikh Muhammad Mahmud al-Sawaf. He was the leader of the Ikhwan in Iraq. So he mobilized the Iraqi people and he managed to form a group of 15,000 soldiers. He alone, the leader of Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Iraq, he was able to gather 15,000 people, right? And if you count the official armies of Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Jordan and Egypt, and you combine them all together, it was 24,000 people, as we said. Now this guy, one guy in Iraq, the head of Ikhwan al-Muslimun in Iraq, he himself was able to gather 15,000 volunteers, right? So he gathered these 15,000 volunteers to fight in Palestine, and he sent these forces to enter Palestine through Jordan, go into Jordan and then enter Palestine. So as they were trying to go forward, the Iraqi government prevented them from moving forward. The Iraqi government said, no, you can't go forward. The only people who will be allowed to go forward are the people who are officially under the Arab army, right? None of these volunteers. So they stopped them from entering into Palestine. Also, the forces of Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun in Jordan, led by Abdul Latif Abu Qura, they entered Palestine, they crossed the river, and they mobilized near Jerusalem. So the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, took a big role in this attempt to liberate Palestine from the Jews. The Muslim Brotherhood forces from Egypt, led by Ahmad Abdul Aziz, also entered Palestine. And they actually got approval from the Egyptian government to do this. The Egyptian government actually allowed the Muslim Brotherhood soldiers to go into Palestine. They didn't want to, right? The Egyptian government did not like Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, right? And they didn't want to allow this to happen, but there was too much pressure from the people. There was too much pressure from the local Egyptians to allow it to happen. So the government caved and they allowed Ahmad Abdul Aziz to take volunteers from Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun into Palestine. And these forces were overseen by an Egyptian military officer who was also from Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, a man named Mahmoud Labib, right? So Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, they really played a very pivotal role in attempting to liberate Palestine from the Jews after the state of Israel was announced. So there were a lot of betrayals, as we mentioned, that took place. You know, the official Arab armies, There were a lot of collaborations that they previously had with the British, and there were a lot of things that they did that caused a lot of discord even after they came into Palestine, claiming that they wanted to liberate it. But because of all of these internal conflicts and because of this disorganization and because of the betrayals that took place, the Muslim forces or the Arab forces were not able to withstand the organized and the well-equipped Jewish military, the Haganah. So there were many battles that took place after May 15th. When these Arab armies came in, a number of battles took place, one after another. And the Jews, for the most part, got the upper hand because of their organization, because of their training, because of their preparation, because of their supplies that were coming in. As for the Arabs, they did not have this level of coordination and organization. So on May 17th, just 2 days after the end of the British Mandate, Akka fell to the Jews. On May 19th, just a couple of days later, the Jews were able to enter the old city of Jerusalem. They were able to enter the old city of Jerusalem. The Jordanian army moved to try to rescue the old city of Jerusalem, right? And the forces from Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, the Jordanian forces of the Muslim Brotherhood, they moved into Jerusalem to try to save it. And they began to besiege the Jewish forces in Jerusalem. So the Muslim Brotherhood, they made a siege on the Jewish forces that entered the old city of Jerusalem. So this is what was going on, within days after the British Mandate ended. On May 22nd, the Security Council issued a call for a ceasefire, the UN Security Council. They said, okay, there has to be a ceasefire. This fighting has to stop, right? And the major powers, the United States, Europe, they pressured the Arab countries to stop fighting. So the Arab countries, they agreed on May 22nd, they agreed to a ceasefire, right? They agreed to a ceasefire. And they withdrew their forces. They withdrew their forces and they stopped fighting. But as for the local mujahideen, those who had weapons, they continued to fight. But as for the official Arab armies, they stopped fighting because of this ceasefire. Now, as for the Jewish forces, during this ceasefire, what were they doing? There was a ceasefire, there was no fighting going on, but the Haganah, they continued to receive weapons during the ceasefire. Europe and the United States continued to send more weapons to the Jews. Whereas the Arabs, they had stopped fighting and they were not receiving any new weaponry. Right? So the ceasefire was going on, but behind the scenes, the Jewish army was continuing to become more and more powerful. Right? And during the ceasefire, training centers were opened in Europe where soldiers were trained in order to go and support the Jews to fight against the Palestinians. So this was all going on during the ceasefire. So they planned this very meticulously. The Arabs, they thought, okay, it's a ceasefire. The ceasefire is for negotiation. During the ceasefire, neither side is going to be doing anything except negotiating. This is what the Arabs thought. But in reality, the Jews, they were doing something else. They had a different plan. They knew that this ceasefire is not, no negotiations are going to be made. No deal is going to be made. The Jews, they knew that. They were not planning to make any deal, but they thought that, okay, this will give us enough time to accumulate more strength, more manpower, more weapons. And then when the ceasefire ends, then we're going to be able to be even stronger and deal them an even bigger blow. So the Arabs, they kind of fell for this. They kind of fell for this trick. And we spoke about in the past how, sadly, the Arabs, they fell for many of these tricks of the British, and now they're falling for the same type of tricks from these Jews. So during this period of time, many Jewish forces from Europe, they came into Palestine, and on June 27th, 1948, the Jewish forces in Palestine, They united with each other, those who came from Europe and those who came from other places. They all united and they formed what became known as the Israeli Defense Forces. On June 27th, the IDF was formed. The IDF was formed. And their numbers exceeded 70,000. There were more than 70,000 of them. And during all of this, the Jews, they formed an official army, the IDF. They got weapons from Europe and from America. Aircraft was being sent to them as well. Military aircrafts were being sent to them as well during this period of time. So they were really preparing themselves during this ceasefire. While during the same period of time, the Arabs, they were just awaiting for the results of the negotiations. That's it. They were just hoping that these negotiations would yield some results. So you see the difference in preparation and the difference in organization. So aircrafts arrived for the IDF, American supplies and weaponry came, along with military forces, soldiers from Europe to support the Jews, while the Arabs were just sitting around waiting for the outcome of the negotiations. So after the negotiations ended, the UN mediator, a man named Count Bernard, he proposed a political solution for the partition of Palestine in a different manner. They said, okay, let's redraw the map and we'll give one section to the Arabs and keep one section for the Jews. He said, we can redraw the map. But the Jews rejected this, and the Arabs, they also rejected this. And during this time, the Jews, they continued to receive more arms. They continued to receive more weapons. And the Arabs, they continued to negotiate without preparing themselves anymore. On July 9th, 1948, after the truce ended, fighting resumed. The ceasefire ended on July 9th, and fighting resumed. And the Palestinians and the Arab soldiers, they tried their best to retake the cities that they had lost, but because of the massive weapons that the Jews had collected during the ceasefire, they collected planes, they collected artillery, so much weaponry, right? Now the Arabs really, they were not able to withstand the forces of the IDF. And the Jews, now with all of this newfound power that they had, with all of these weapons and these planes and this artillery and everything that they now have, that they collected during the ceasefire, now they didn't stop at just taking cities within Palestine. They took their planes and they started bombing Arab countries as well. The Jewish planes, they bombed Cairo, they bombed Damascus, they bombed Amman, right? So now they're not only focusing on Palestine, they're bombing the Arab countries as well, with weaponry and planes provided by Europe and the United States. So this was the situation in the summer of 1948. This was the situation in the summer of 1948, and the situation for the Palestinians was very, very bad. And mass slaughter and mass expulsion of the Palestinians continued, and Palestinian cities continued to fall one by one to the Jews of the newly established state of Israel. So inshallah we'll stop there for today bi'idhnillah, and inshallah next week we will continue to speak more of the events of 1948 bi'idhnillah. Jazakumullah khairan wa barakallahu feekum. Wallahu a'lam. Sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.